Jay Gordon. I'm a cloud advocate with Azure. I want to talk to you a little bit about how it could be kind of scary to start using continuous integration and continuous deployment with AKS, Azure Kubernetes Service. It can be a little worrisome at first, but to be honest with you, there are tools to make it easier for you. And today we're going to talk about some of them. We're going to go through the process of deploying an application, and we're going to use the deployment center that's built into AKS. We're going to use GitHub Actions to do the deployment. I'm going to provide you with some tools to create your cluster, create the Azure Container Registry, the service principal for role-based authentication you might need. So all that is going to get described and demoed for you. So let's get into it, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to build an Azure Kubernetes service and an Azure Container Service with a service principal for that. And then after that, we are going to then use the deployment center. And what the deployment center is going to do is it's going to create a GitHub workflow file. Now, I've been doing this already, and I've been doing it with web app service. Here's kind of an example of what a web app service workflow file would look like. And then to my right is when I was working on this previously, I saved my workflow file because I wanted you to kind of take a look at it. These are the workflow files that were created in order to do my deployment. Now, when these workflows were created, there were also some manifests generated for me. You'll see there's this Kates directory, and this Kates directory has a deployment and a load balancer, a bit of YAML that I wrote. And this is just kind of some legacy stuff, and this is what I did to actually fix. So when you deploy, you see I've got some extra manifests, and I'm going to delete some of them. Matter of fact, I'll delete deployment and ingress because I've been using service-1 and deployment 1 and ingress 1, and let me show you. So deployment 1, right now it's specific to my app, and so I made some changes from the default. So let's look at deployment, which is a default one. So it's not quite as complex as my other one. I've got more replicas in mine. I have a 3 replica set. I've got some port probes and some memory requests because this is a pretty simple application. So the only difference also is I was using an older version of Kubernetes, so I needed to update the API version or backport the API version, because if you look at this one, I'm using apps v1, and if you look at the one that you can see API version 1, let me actually go to deployment, my bad. Apps v1 beta 1, which I think requires a much newer version of Kubernetes than I'm using. So let's go over to what's going to happen. So we're going to use, we're going to go ahead and create an AKS cluster. Now, there's a couple ways to do it. You can do it through the portal. You can follow the deploy to Azure button, which if you go to browse on GitHub, you'll get the deploy to Azure button right here. And if we click visualize, we'll see exactly what the ARM template would build for us. So a role assignment and then the parameters for the actual cluster. We look at the actual code for it and we'll see what's going to happen. So I'm not going to do this today, and there's a reason why. So I created a little all-in-one that essentially creates everything that I want. So as you can see, what happens is we'll provide some small parameters here. Then what we'll do is we'll create the role-based authentication via the service principal. We'll create a resource group. We'll create the cluster. Then we'll get the credentials in our local cloud shell, and then eventually we'll get some of the information that we'll need for the future. But essentially, this is a pretty like plug and play kind of script. So I'm going to show you how to use it first to build your cluster. You can go ahead here, clone this by just going to your dashboard, opening up a Cloud Shell. So I'm just make dir demo j. Now let's go into demo j where we're going to do all of our work today. And I'm just git clone. Cool. So there we go. We've got our AKS ACR all in one, which is what we're going to be working with. So let's go in there. And so all we have to do is just a few simple things. So if we open this with code, AKS ACR sh, what we can do is now determine what we want created for our cluster. So our group name, we're just going to call it clock AKS 01. We'll call we'll use the location East US. We'll call the AKS cluster name the same thing as our group name. Our ACR name, that is our Azure Container Registry. This has got to be globally unique. So what we'll do is we'll just change AKS to ACR. Then our sub ID, our actual subscription that we are building this within. I'm going to just show you an old one that I was working with. Let me grab my subscription ID. You can get that if you go into your portal, you type subscriptions, and then you just go to your subscription. You'll see your subscription ID right there. You can just use that to build it with. All right. So let's move along. So now we need to get the Kubernetes version that we're going to build this with. And so all we have to do is just take this variable right here, pop it in here into the Cloud Shell. And then what I'm going to do is just run this command right there. So what that will do, and I'll bring this up a little for you. So watch this. It's going to tell me all the versions of Kubernetes that are currently available in the region that I want to work with. So I'm going to use a non-preview version just for today. We'll use 1.16.7. And all we have to do is now just take the Kate's version, pop it right there. Okay, so we've done that. We've got all of our stuff set up. Now I'm just going to go ahead and save this. Close it. Now all I have to do is type bash AKS ACR. So we're going to wait. And what's going to happen is after a few minutes, we're going to have our service principal created. We are going to have our AKS cluster built. We're going to have an Azure Container Registry built. As you can see, we've already started the process. It's going to take about a few minutes. And then when this cluster is done, it'll be linked to that ACR. So there'll be a service principal allowing push-pull. And I should say pull from the container registry over to the AKS cluster. So once we finish this, what we're going to do is go through the deployment center. I'm going to make a couple changes to my pipeline and probably to my deployment manifests. And once we finish that, you'll kind of see how it's iterated so we have exactly what we're looking to have built. So I'm going to pause for a few seconds. We're going to come back once this cluster's finished completing its initial deployment. And then what we'll do is we're going to then deploy our React clock basic applications. So I'm going to delete some of these errant files while I'm gone. And then when I come back, I'm going to show you the new stuff that's going to be created and how we're going to use it. Okay?
Hey everybody, it's Jay. So this is a few months old and I'm just replaying it for you today. Remember, Microsoft Build is this week. And so we won't be live on Thursday. We'll be back next week. And I've got a really, really great show for that next week. But this week I'm going to be replaying an episode. If you haven't registered for Build yet, you can go right over there, register.build.microsoft.com. If you got anything to share with me, feel free to hit the chat on here. If it's about this, it's about another subject. You got me for another, say, 15, 20 minutes. So let's let's talk if we need to. All right.
So we'll be right
See you
back.
later.
Okay, we're back. So what happened? We have a new Azure Kubernetes cluster that's ready to go. Here's my stuff for the future if I want to create another one using the same service principle. Over here, I went ahead and I deleted those extra manifest files. So I cloned open my app. It's right here. We don't need the all-in-one script anymore, so we can get out of there. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go to the actual created resource group, and we're going to start using the deployment center. And what's the deployment center going to do? It's going to help us build a full CI/CD pipeline using GitHub Actions. All right, and that is really, really useful because a bunch of the YAML we don't actually have to write. We don't have to configure the secrets within GitHub. It'll be done for us. So let's go ahead and go into clock AKS. What was that? Cool. So here's our resource group for our new cluster. And we've got a cluster right here and a container registry. So this is where our Docker images are going to be stored, and then they're eventually going to be deployed to our Kubernetes cluster. So how are we going to get that started? Let's go ahead and click on the cluster. And now what we can see is what kind of matches here. The node pools that are currently there. And if we wanted to kubectl get pods all namespaces, and you can see our cluster's up. Here's all the information about the managed services. So we now have a managed Kubernetes cluster. It's up and running. We're ready to go. Okay. So what we're going to do next is we are going to go to the deployment center. It's right here on the left side. It's still in preview. It's extremely useful though. So I'm going to just bring this down here for a little bit because we don't need it for a little while. We're going to click GitHub as our source where our code is. We'll click next, and then it's going to authorize me to use GitHub. So Azure will create a trust. I've already authed before, so I didn't have to type in my username and password, but if you didn't, you'll have to do that. So let's go ahead and we're going to scroll down to the repository we're going to be working with today, which is React Clock Basic. You're going to want to fork this and do it in your own branch because you need to save workflow files. So make sure you don't try to do this in mine. We won't be able to. Fork it. You have to use your account. So my repository, next. If you look here, we'll now be asked for the Docker file. And if you look, I've got in the repository right over here, our Docker file with our information. So we're going to be building node 12. It's going to just put it in user source app. Pretty standard, npm start, expose 8080. Here's our port 8080, Docker build context, next. Cool. So it's going to ask where our container registry is. We already created one. Clock ACR01, done. So here we go. Configuring continuous delivery pipeline. Super awesome. Getting all this is really simple. Rather than having to build a lot of things that are going to be built for you, we have it all done through the deployment center. We're going to make a couple changes though. So we can see right now we've got this deploy to AKS cluster. Now this is probably going to fail out of the box, and the only reason why is that it's my fault. I've got specific things for the app that I need done. So our build and deploy will probably go through. It's going to set up the job, and then probably it'll get to a point where it'll try to start a portion of our application using a particular version of Kubernetes, and it could possibly not work. So we're just going to take a look. Maybe it will work, maybe it won't. If it doesn't, we'll see what failed, and we'll see what exactly we need to fix, okay? So right now, what we can see is it's going to build our Docker from our GitHub workspace that we're working with, which is essentially what was last committed to master. And so when we finished and we said deploy here to in our deployment center, what happened is this particular file, and what I'll do is I'll go over here and I'll do git pull, and you can see my repository has been updated, and we've got some new things here. So we've got deployment with some specific settings. They're not really going to match what I want, and I'll show you deployment 1. So this is the way I configure my deployment. It's just the way I believe and it should be done. And this is the API version that I'm using as compared to the one that comes out of the box. So what I can do here to make this pretty simple is I can essentially just replace some of the things I have. So I'm going to just take this. I've got a scratch pad up here. I'll just paste this into my scratch pad. I'll go into deployment 1. I mean, the even easier thing to do here, I'll be honest with you, is watch this. We're just going to take deployment 1. We're going to update the name of my app. So the name right here, I'm just going to update this here. We're going to update the app name. We're going to right here. I mean, we can also just do a find and replace, but I'm just showing you what exactly and how easy we can make this change for. So now right here, the only difference is we're going to make this instead of the AKS, we are going to change this to the ACR. Okay, so we've made those changes, right? Just got to make sure we update this right here. Cool. So let me make sure. Yep, that's the image. So we've got this updated, and then what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to save it. So save my changes to deployment 1, and then just copy them and put them into the deployment. Okay, save it. And then what we'll do is we'll do the same thing for ingress. So just copy from ingress 1, go into ingress 2. The only difference is we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to cut, take our block from there. We are going to take our ingress from our last time. So that would be ingress 1. And this was what was in ingress. So we'll take the contents of ingress 1. Just go ahead into ingress. And then all I'm going to do, once again, name. And we can see that already failed for reasons we know. So app, same. We'll leave that. We'll change the host, which is the API host. And then just the service name. Okay. So we got our ingress done. So we can go ahead and delete the old deployment 1. Move to trash. We can move ingress 1. Delete. And now what we'll do is we'll do the same thing for service. So go to the old service, the default one that was created for us, paste that in there, go to the new one. We'll just take out what was in service 1. We'll copy it into service, update our information. So you can see just a couple changes here, and what we can do is change the app name, and we're ready to go. We're all set to rock. So now same situation, save this file, delete the extra service file, and so now I've got my deployment, my ingress, my service all built. They match our new configuration, and so now all I'm going to do is git add git commit -m, and we'll say updated workflow, and well, I should say updated manifests. git push. It deleted our old deployment files. We'll do git push. So let's watch what happens once we push all those changes. We'll go to actions. We'll see updated manifests triggered a new release. Now, I have that Azure web app also in my functions, or I should say my GitHub workflows directory. So every time I commit, it's automatically going to trigger that one as well. There's no way to get around that unless I just don't have it always commit to master. And if I wanted to, I could run, say, the same application with two different branches. Maybe I want to have one branch go to the web app version and another branch go to the Kubernetes cluster. It's really dependent on what you need, but it's very, very extensible. So we'll go here to build and deploy. And so now we're doing our build process. So I made some changes, but now we're actually building our image. We're going to eventually run Azure's Kubernetes configuration. We'll create the namespace. Here we go. Things are starting to move along. Our application is being built, and then it's going to be packed into the image and then sent to the ACR. Once that's done, we'll eventually run Azure's case set context. We'll create the namespace that it's going to live in, so it won't just sit in the Kubernetes default namespace. If you need to know more about namespaces, there's a ton of documentation around it. Take a look at it. So we're going to continue to let this run. And while this runs, I want to show you how a lot of this is happening right now. So now we got to the point, we made our changes and they all worked. Remember, the last time we did all this, it failed. But this time, we've got our clock created, our deployment, our service for our pods, and then we've got also our load balancer created. So we've got all the pieces we need. And so we're going to let this finish. While this is finishing, I'm going to go over into settings. I want to show you what happened in this repository, something that the deployment center did for us. So if we click here on the left side to secrets, looky here, clock AKS kube config, clock ACR username, the password, all encrypted, stored. See, secrets or environments are encrypted and only exposed to selected actions. So let's take a look at what that means. So if we go over to the workflow file here and master J's clock, I believe it's this deployed AKS right here. Here is where the secrets are actually provided, right here. So the secrets are passed using these variables. You can customize this the way you need. You can add additional variables into what you're doing and have that passed into your eventually created cluster. That's, I should say, image. That's all up to you. But these are the things that have been made really, really easy for you. So looks like our deploy finished. So we're already in kubectl. So all we have to do now, we've already got our kubectl information. If we didn't, what we could do here, let me bring this up so it's a little bit easier to see, is we could easily do AKS get credentials, and then it's going to ask me for the group, and so we'll call the group, or I should say the name, and it should be clock AKS01, and I think maybe the cluster also. So cluster, nope, resource group. So we're going to change this. Hey, you know, it's good to try things. That was my mistake. I should have removed that one dash. Sorry. So if you do this, Azure will provide you with the credentials to be able to use kubectl to eventually make changes to the cluster. So what we want to do now that we've deployed to the cluster, we've done everything, let's take a look at. So we can find out what the namespace is just by looking into the manifest for the, I should say, the workflow file. And you can see that we have this namespace here. We could have just looked it up on the cluster, but this is easier. So kubectl get pods namespace okay, so our pods are running. So now I want to get my information about my load balancer. So let's get services. There's my service from my load balancer. Curl that. Let's take a look. Go to the IP in a browser. That's it. That was it. We had to just make 1 or 2 changes to the actual manifest. You might have to do that as well if you want to go ahead and make whatever it is work the way you want it to work. In this case, out of the box, the manifest didn't do the port 80 move. So if we look here at our load balancer, by default, all it's really doing is just making port 80 available. But what I did, if we go into the service right here, is I made it port 80 was being forwarded from port 8080. And if I also wanted to, I could make it 443. I could go ahead and provide my certificate information, all those things. So, deleting everything, that's super, super simple. Let's do it. So, AKS, group, delete, name, not the IP address, but the name. So it's clock AKS 01, clock AKS 01, minus Y for yes. That's because I forgot the AZ in front. AZ AKS group. All right, what did I do? Oh, geez, what is wrong with me? AZ AKS delete. I super realize what I'm doing wrong. Group delete. Sometimes we get silly and we do it live and we don't know what it is we're actually getting wrong. And then once we look at it a little further, we realize what we're getting wrong. So that's going to run. That's going to delete our cluster. And then all I need to do now is actually go to jmasterclock here, the YAML file in the GitHub flow, and then delete it. And then git add git commit -m removed workflow file git push git push, and then what'll happen is we actually go back to the repo now. We'll look in the workflows. That's been deleted. Actions will then see it also, because remember, I've got that other cluster, not a cluster, but that AZ web app, or I should say the Azure web app here. So I'm using that also. So that's also going to get built and recreated just in case I made any changes. But I didn't. Anyway, that's using Deployment Center with GitHub Actions. If you have any questions, let me know.